Dad told every employer. I was a thief. 2 years, no job, no explanation. He said, maybe now you'll learn respect. Last week, a CEO handed me a sealed envelope and said, your grandmother knew this day was coming. The envelope was letter-sized, cream-colored. My name on the front in handwriting I would have recognized anywhere, in any context, under any circumstances. The careful, unhurried cursive of a woman who had learned penmanship when it was still taught as a discipline and had never stopped practicing it. Nora, open when the time is right. You'll know. The date stamped in the corner, September 14th, 2009, 15 years ago. I was 16. My grandmother had been dead for 3 of them. The man handing it to me across a conference room table in downtown Raleigh was Marcus Hale, CEO of Hale Structural Group, one of the most respected civil engineering firms in North Carolina, the company I had applied to with the specific desperation of someone who has been turned down by 31 employers over 26 months and is starting to understand that the problem is not their resume. He was 62, silver at the temples. He had the steady, unhurried bearing of a man who has built things with his hands and his decisions for a long time. He set the envelope on the table between us and kept one hand resting near it, not on it. The posture of someone delivering something that belongs to someone else and knows it. Your grandmother gave this to my mother in 2009, he said, with very specific instructions. She said, when Nora walks into a room that matters, and she will, give her this first, before anything else. My hands were in my lap. I did not reach for it yet. How did you know, I said, that this room was the one? He looked at me for a moment. Because your grandmother told my mother what to watch for. He paused. And because I've been watching your application sit in my inbox for 3 weeks and I know what a sabotage career looks like. I've seen enough of them. I picked up the envelope. My grandmother had been dead for 3 years. She had apparently spent the 15 years before that making arrangements for a moment she believed was coming. She was right. She was always right. My name is Nora Voss. I'm 31 years old. I have a master's degree in civil engineering from NC State, a professional engineering license that I passed on my first attempt, and a 2-year gap in my employment history that I have been explaining carefully and incompletely in every interview I've managed to get since I was 29. I grew up in Mill Haven, North Carolina, a town of about 14,000 people where everyone's business is everyone's business, and a reputation, once damaged, tends to stay that way. My father, Dale Voss, managed the town's largest hardware supply depot for 20 years. My mother, Connie, ran the front office of a local insurance brokerage. They were, by Mill Haven's accounting, pillars, the kind of family that got thanked at the annual chamber dinner, the kind whose name meant something when you said it at a bank counter. That name meant something to me too, for most of my life. I was the oldest of 2. My brother Cody is 4 years younger, and I loved him in the uncomplicated way you love someone you've known since before you had the vocabulary to name the feeling. My parents' relationship with me was more complicated, not cruel, not obviously wrong, but tilted in the way that some family dynamics are tilted, where one child exists to be protected and the other exists to be capable. I was capable. Cody was protected. Those are not complaints. That's just the weather of the household I grew up in, and you learn to dress for the weather you have. What I want to tell you about is my grandmother, Eleanor Voss, my father's mother, 79 when she died, sharp until the last 6 months when the dementia began taking things in the quiet, methodical way it does. She had run the town's only bookkeeping service for 32 years out of a converted sunroom on Maple Street, doing accounts for every small business in Mill Haven, with the precision of a woman who considered errors in arithmetic a form of moral failure. She was the first person who told me I was going to be an engineer. I was 9. We were building a birdhouse. Her idea, her tools, her workshop in the garage that smelled of sawdust and linseed oil. She handed me a square and told me to check the corner. Is it right? She asked. I checked it 3 times before I answered. Yes. She looked at me for a moment. You checked it 3 times. I wanted to be sure. That, she said, is an engineer. The ones who check it 3 times before they say yes. She gave me her engineering reference books when I was 12. 3 of them, hardcover, marked with paper clips at the sections she considered essential. She drove me to my college tour at NC State when my parents said they were too busy. She called me every Sunday through graduate school without exception and asked not how I was, but what I was working on, because she understood that for people like us, the work and the self were not separate things. When she died in the spring of 2021, I sat with her in the final days and held her hand while the dementia took the last of what it was taking, and I told her about the project I was working on, a pedestrian bridge assessment outside Durham, because even then, even at the end, she would sometimes surface and want to know what I was working on. She died on a Thursday morning. I did not know about the envelope. I did not know about a lot of things. The falling out with my parents happened in January of my 29th year, and it started the way these things often start, with money. My father had been having financial difficulties. Not ruinous, not catastrophic, but the hardware depot had gone through a management transition, and his role had been reduced, and there were some debts that had accumulated during the transition that were causing pressure. He came to me in the way he came to me when he needed something, not with the language of asking, but with the language of informing, as though the outcome had already been decided and we were simply working out the logistics. We need $30,000, he said. Short term, 6 months. I was 32 months into my first postgraduate job at an environmental consulting firm in Raleigh, earning a salary that was good but not liquid in the way my father's request required. More importantly, I had concerns about the debts he'd described. The numbers didn't add up in the way I'd want numbers to add up before putting my name on anything adjacent to them. I asked for documentation. Standard practice. I am an engineer. I checked the corner 3 times. My father's face went a particular way. Documentation, he repeated. I want to understand what I'm helping with. I want to see, you want to see. He stood up from the kitchen table. Your mother and I spent 30 years building something in this town, and you want to sit here and ask for documentation like we're strangers. Dad, you've gotten too big, he said. That's the problem. You've been in the city too long, working with those people, and you've forgotten where you came from. I told him I hadn't forgotten anything. I told him I loved him. I told him if he showed me the numbers and they made sense, I would help. He left without showing me the numbers. My mother called the following week. Her voice had the quality of someone who has been assigned a task and is performing it dutifully. You really hurt your father, she said, after everything he's done for you. I said I hadn't meant to hurt anyone. He needed you, she said, and you made him feel like a criminal. I told her that asking for documentation was standard financial practice, not an accusation. She said, I hope you think about the kind of person you're becoming. Then she hung up. I sat with that for a few days, turned it over, checked it from the angles I check things. I called my father one more time and said I was sorry for how it had landed, and I still wanted to help, but I needed to see the numbers. He did not return that call. The first rejection came in April, a civil engineering firm in Chapel Hill. I'd applied for a senior structural analyst position, a reasonable next step, a natural fit for my experience. I made it through 2 rounds of interviews, received a preliminary verbal offer, and then heard nothing for 2 weeks. When I followed up, the HR coordinator told me, with the careful language of someone trying to be kind, that they'd decided to go in a different direction. I told myself these things happened. The second rejection came in May, 3rd in June. By September, I had been through 11 interview processes that had ended without explanation after appearing to go well, and I had begun to feel the specific, disorienting anxiety of someone who cannot identify the variable that keeps producing the wrong result. I updated my portfolio, rewrote my resume twice, asked a colleague to review my interview technique. Nothing changed. In October, I ran into Deborah Finch. Deborah had been my father's administrative assistant at the depot for 7 years before she left for a position in Durham. We'd always gotten along. She saw me at a coffee shop near my apartment and stopped, and something moved across her face. Not quite pity, but adjacent to it. Nora, she said, I've been wondering whether to call you. We sat down. She held her cup in both hands and looked at the table. I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to say it. Your father has been making calls to firms in the area. He's been telling people that you were let go from Mercer Environmental for stealing, falsifying expense reports. He's been very specific about it. The coffee shop was warm. I felt very cold. He's been doing it for months, she said. I heard about it from someone at a firm in Cary. They recognized your name and asked me if I knew you. She looked up. I'm so sorry, Nora. I didn't know until recently, or I'd have called sooner. I drove home, sat in my car in the parking garage for a while. My hands were not shaking. They were very, very still. I thought, check the corner 3 times before you say yes. I spent that evening pulling together every record I could find from my time at Mercer Environmental. Performance reviews, expense reports, my formal separation agreement when I'd left voluntarily for the Chapel Hill opportunity that had then evaporated. Everything clean, everything documented. 14 months of unblemished employment records. Then I called my father. He answered on the second ring. I told him what I'd heard. I used precise language. I did not raise my voice. Silence on his end for a long moment. Then, maybe now you'll learn to respect us. He hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while. My chest felt strange. Not tight, exactly, but dense, like something solid had formed where air used to be. My father had spent 8 months calling employers throughout the Research Triangle and telling them his daughter was a thief, had been specific and credible and consistent, because he was a man with a 30-year reputation in the region, and people took his calls and believed what he said, had done it deliberately and systematically, and had just, when confronted, told me it was a lesson. I set my phone face down on the desk, opened my laptop, and started building a file. I called an attorney named Patricia Carver the following week. Patricia had been practicing employment and defamation law in Raleigh for 23 years. She was 51, methodical, and had the particular quality of someone who has heard every version of family as adversary and does not find any of them surprising. She listened to the full account, Deborah Finch, the pattern of rejections, my father's statement on the phone, and asked several precise questions. Do you have the statement documented? The call where he said that to you? I have the date, time, and the exact words. Any other witnesses who can speak to the pattern of calls he made? Deborah Finch. And I have a contact at the Cary firm she mentioned who is willing to confirm they received a call from my father describing me as having been terminated for theft. Patricia was quiet for a moment. What you're describing is defamation per se under North Carolina law, she said. False statements of fact that harm professional reputation, specifically false accusations of criminal conduct. The standard for damages is more straightforward than ordinary defamation. She paused. Do you want to pursue this? I thought about it. Not yet, I said. I want to document everything first. I want the full picture before I decide what to do with it. That's wise, she said. Build your file, come back when you have it. I built the file. Over the next 4 months, I traced the pattern as carefully as I traced stress calculations on a structural drawing. Deborah gave me a written statement. The contact at the Cary firm, a project manager named Glenn Shue, who had worked with my father through Chamber of Commerce events, agreed to provide written confirmation that Dale Voss had called the firm in April and described his daughter as having been terminated from her previous position for expense fraud. 2 more contacts came forward through the engineering community. The Research Triangle professional network is smaller than it appears, and once people knew someone was asking, information arrived. A firm in Durham, a municipal engineering office in Wake County. Both had received calls. Both had filed the calls somewhere in their institutional memory and decided, when asked, that they would rather be honest about it. My father had called at least 6 firms. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify is linked in the description. 6 documented contacts. 6 places where a 30-year business reputation had been deployed as a weapon against his own daughter because she had asked to see paperwork before lending $30,000. Patricia received the completed file in February. "This is thorough," she said. There was something in her voice that I recognized as professional respect. "This is more than we'd need." "I know," I said, but I wanted to be sure. I applied to Hale Structural Group on a Thursday in March. I'd been aware of the firm for years. Marcus Hale had built a reputation for bridge and infrastructure work that was regarded in the structural engineering community the way certain things are regarded when they're done right, consistently over a long time. I had applied without enormous optimism, because 26 months of rejections recalibrate your optimism in specific ways, and because I wasn't sure whether my father's calls had reached this far into the market. The interview was scheduled for a Tuesday. Standard format. Initial meeting with the CEO, then technical panel, then HR. I arrived at 9:45. Navy blazer, my best portfolio, the folder with my documentation in my bag because I carried it everywhere now the way some people carry insurance cards. The receptionist walked me to the conference room and said Mr. Hale would be with me shortly. He walked in at 10:02. He was taller than I'd expected. The silver temples, the handshake that was brief and firm, the way he looked at me when he looked at me, directly, without the slight film of preemptive judgment I'd learned to recognize in the past 2 years. He sat down across from me, set a cream-colored envelope on the table between us, my name on the front, my grandmother's handwriting, the date in the corner, September 14th, 2009. The whole world rearranged itself very quietly. I held the envelope for a long moment before I opened it. "How did your mother know my grandmother?" I asked. "They were in the same bookkeeping network for 20 years, Marcus said. "My mother ran accounts for small manufacturers in this region. Your grandmother was the best in Millhaven. They met at a professional conference in 1991 and stayed in contact." He paused. "Your grandmother called my mother in September of 2009 and asked her to hold something. She was very specific. She said, 'This is for my granddaughter Nora. When she comes to you, and she will because she's going to be the kind of engineer who ends up in rooms like yours, give her this before anything else happens.' She called you," I said, "before she died. About 8 months before. She wasn't well yet, the diagnosis hadn't come, but she was thinking ahead. She said she had things arranged for you, but she wanted a failsafe, something outside the family, something no one could intercept." He paused. "She said, 'My son means well, but he has always needed to be the most important person in the room. And Nora has never needed that, which means she's going to spend a long time being underestimated by people who mistake not needing it for not deserving it.'" I looked at the envelope. "She knew," I said, not as a question. "She knew," he said quietly. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten, both sides, the same careful, unhurried cursive. I am not going to reproduce it in full because it belongs to me, in the way some things simply belong to you and don't require an audience. But I will tell you what it contained because the contents are the point. My grandmother had, over the course of her 32 years of bookkeeping in Millhaven, maintained her own records, not just her clients' accounts, her own observations, written down, dated, filed in the systematic way of a woman who had learned that memory was fallible and paper was not. Among those observations, 15 years of watching my father operate in the Millhaven business community with a reputation built partly on her own name and partly on a series of financial arrangements that she had, over time, come to understand were not what they appeared to be. She was specific. She was precise. She named figures, dates, and transactions. She also, and this was the part that made my chest go dense in a different way than it had gone dense in the parking garage, described watching me. "I have watched Nora check her work 3 times since she was 9 years old," she wrote. "I have watched her leave school early and come home and take night classes and earn every credential on her own because your parents needed the mortgage covered and you were the one who could, so you did. I have watched them call this strength and use it as a reason not to give you anything because strong people don't need things, and you had the misfortune of being strong. What I am leaving you in this envelope is not money, though there is money coming through other channels. Find R. Hollis in Sacramento if you haven't already. What I am leaving you is documentation, my documentation. 32 years of a bookkeeper's observations about how your father runs his business and how his reputation was built, and on whose name. I am leaving it with someone I trust, to give to you in a room that matters, because I want you to have it before you decide what to do, not to use it as a weapon, but to use it as ballast, to know that someone saw the whole picture and wrote it down and made sure it reached you. You are going to be an engineer, Nora. You are going to build things that stand. Some of what you build will be bridges, some of it will be your own life. Both require checking the corner 3 times. I love you. I saw you. I wrote it all down. Grandma L. I sat in that conference room for a while after I finished reading. Marcus Hale had had stepped out. He'd said he'd give me whatever time I needed, and he meant it, because he was apparently the kind of man who could read a room accurately. I sat with the letter in my hands, and the afternoon light coming through the conference room windows, and the weight of 15 years of a sealed envelope being exactly right about everything. Then I opened my bag, took out my folder, set it on the table beside my grandmother's letter. When Marcus came back in, I told him everything. I used the same clinical precision I'd used with Patricia Carver. Timeline, documentation, Deborah Finch, Glenn Shue, the 6 firms, the phone call. Maybe now you'll learn to respect us. He listened without interrupting. He was very good at listening. The children of women like his mother tend to be. When I finished, he looked at the folder. Patricia Carver, he said, reading the letterhead on the top document. 23 years in employment and defamation law. He nodded slowly. What are you planning to do with this? I don't know yet, I said. I wanted to see the whole picture first. He looked at me for a moment. Your grandmother said that, he said, word for word. She said, Nora won't act until she sees the whole picture. That's why she'll be right when she does. Patricia filed the defamation claim in April. Dale Voss, defendant. 6 counts of defamation per se under North Carolina statute, supported by written statements from Deborah Finch and Glenn Shue, confirmations from 4 additional contacts, and documentation of the specific professional harm. 26 months of unemployment, 11 documented failed interview processes, quantifiable salary loss calculated by an expert witness Patricia brought in, a labor economist named Dr. James Okonkwo, who had testified in employment cases for 16 years and put the documented economic harm at $194,000. My grandmother's documentation went to a separate attorney, an estate specialist Patricia recommended named Carol Breyer, who had been practicing in Wake County for 18 years and described Eleanor Voss's records as among the most methodical she had seen from a non-legal professional. Carol's assessment of what the records showed about my father's business practices resulted in a separate referral to the county business licensing office and a conversation with my father's former business partners that I was not party to, but heard about in pieces. My father called me in May. He had an attorney now. His attorney had advised him to call. He spoke for a long time. Some of it sounded like apology. Some of it sounded like a man recategorizing what he had done into something more defensible. I listened to all of it. Then I said, Patricia Carver is handling my correspondence. You can have your attorney contact her office. I hung up, not from anger, from clarity. My mother called the following week. Her voice was different. The performance quality was gone. The assigned task quality, the dutifully delivered disappointment. She sounded small in the way my father had sounded small on the phone to me 2 years ago about the money. I recognized the sound. I didn't know he was making calls, she said. I want you to know that. I knew he was angry. I didn't know he— Mom, I said. I should have known. I should have asked more questions. I said, I believe you didn't know. She was quiet. I don't know if that's enough, I said. I'm not sure yet, but I believe you. She cried for a while. I stayed on the line. The case settled in August. Patricia's recommendation and mine. The settlement amount is not something I've disclosed publicly, and I won't here. What I will say is that Dr. Okonkwo's $194,000 figure was not the ceiling. My father's attorney negotiated written retractions to each of the 6 firms, formal, on letterhead, signed by Dale Voss. I have copies. I also have my grandmother's letter, and her 32 years of bookkeeping observations, and the 3 engineering reference books she gave me when I was 12, still on my shelf, still marked with her paper clips at the section she considered essential. I started at Hale Structural Group in September. The position is Senior Structural Engineer, Infrastructure Division. The work is exactly what I spent 6 years in school and 3 years in practice training for, and I am good at it, and I check my work 3 times before I say yes, and my team has learned that about me quickly and treats it as the professional standard it is. Marcus Hale is not a warm man in the obvious sense. He doesn't do office birthday cakes or team lunches with forced conversation, but he is the kind of leader who notices what people are actually doing and says so plainly, without fanfare, at the right moment. Last month, he came to my office door and said, the load analysis on the Garner Street project was exactly right. Then he left. That was enough.